Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Fantasy Favorites podcast for Week 8. Good to be back. It's been a few weeks since we've had a chance to get to sit down and do this, Chris, but really excited to dive into this with you as we near the midpoint of the season. For those that don't know, Chris was the 2023 number one ranked expert at FantasyPros. He just did an AMA with them earlier this evening. He's also so far this season ranked number one in ranking quarterbacks, number two in ranking defenses, and number 5 in ranking running backs. If only we could get this guy to figure out how to rank a pass catcher, he might be pretty useful. But anyway, Chris, how's it going, man? Excited to be back with you.
Yeah, it's good to be back, Dalton. I had to spend the last 2 weeks out of the state. As you know, my home base is here in Pittsburgh. Had to go down to Florida because of Hurricane Milton, unfortunately, and had to help my dad evacuate. He was in Bradenton, which basically got directly hit by the hurricane. So made sure he got safely moved in-state to Orlando, where my sister lives and other family. So we rode it out. Orlando got really lucky. We barely got any of the storm. So we were good there with family. Made it back home. There's a few things we had to fix up. So long story short, we made it out alive. We made it out safe, as opposed to some other people who got it really rough. So very grateful and fortunate. Still grinding on the rankings every week, but just didn't have time to do the show due to the setup we had. But yeah, man, it's just continuing to grind here for Week 8. A lot of injuries going on. Players we're not sure of, whether it's Deebo Samuel, Zay Flowers, George Kittle, Juwan Jennings, like a lot of 49ers things to work through, right? Especially with the waiver wire pickups with Ricky Pearsall, et cetera. So ready to go, man. I think I told you before, kind of jokingly with the accuracy rankings, like I play in all PPR, full PPR leagues, and Fantasy Pros scores for half PPR. And I think that's why my wide receiver and tight end rankings are always lower than the rest of my position. So I got to get the kicker one up a little bit more. I got to get into the top 10 in kickers, and I think we'll be good there.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows kickers are the most important position in fantasy. So,
of course,
we'll certainly touch on those later in the show. To start things off this week, I think given that it's been a few weeks, it makes some sense for us to first dive into your rest of season rankings. You post those every week with the top 250 players, kind of meant as a trade cheat sheet for people, and also just to give folks a sense of where you land given what's left of the season for each player. As always, there are some players that you're higher on than the market, some others that you're lower on than the market. But what I really like this week is you've put players into tiers. And with those tiers, it kind of gives folks a sense of how are we bunching together these players from a rankings perspective when we start thinking about trade packages and things of the like. So,
yep.
I want to start close to the top and jump into a couple players that you're a little bit either higher or lower on than the market. The first name that stuck out to me that I want to talk to you a little bit about, Kenneth Walker. You've got Kenneth Walker ranked all the way up at number 6 overall. The expert consensus on him has him a little bit outside the top 10 at number 11. That means among running backs, you have him only behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. I think there's probably some people in our audience who are surprised to see him ahead of Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. Even some people might be surprised to see him ahead of Alvin Kamara. So talk to me a little bit about Kenneth Walker, why you're so bullish on him moving forward.
Yeah, so I think that with Kenneth Walker overall, really for him, it's just the workload. Like he's being involved in the passing game compared to how he wasn't involved in the passing game in years past. We've seen now through quite a few different games with Kenneth Walker. You got to look at the results overall and then look at the usage. Like he's in a high volume offense. The Seattle Seahawks are running plays at the highest rate in the league, which really means a lot. And you look at his weekly finishes, he's been top 10 or better in 4 of the 5 weeks he's played this year. The worst he's been is RB15. I mean, that's just excellent consistency overall. You'd think he'd have at least one down week this past week, scores a receiving touchdown. Going into week 7, from weeks 4 to 6, he had 21 combined targets in 3 different games, had a 7-catch game in week 5, an 8-catch game in week 6. I mean, in terms of just also getting the bulk of the rushing work, it's just an awesome role for Kenneth Walker. And I expect those targets to continue as DK Metcalf is now week to week as well. So, man, it's bullish in terms of the offensive environment he's in terms of the talent, like the athleticism and talent of the player itself. We know The explosive plays are always there. And when you give him the floor of having that target share, Zach Charbonnet is a great handcuff, but Charbonnet at this point has little to no standalone flex value. So, you look at Saquon Barkley, he has a great workload similar to Walker. Now Breece Hall has a similar workload. Let's say in week 7, Bijan had a similar workload, whereas he didn't earlier in the year. So I've got him right up near those guys. And for me overall, those are my top 5 running backs. I put Kyron, Joe Mixon right in that range as well. I think those 7 running backs truly have an elite workhorse role. Now, look, I have Derrick Henry second in my running back rankings rest of the season, but it's just because of the crazy efficiency. However, Derrick Henry can get game scripted out in terms of games where Baltimore is trailing. So I still put him there number 2 because of the efficiency of what he's shown this year. But that's kind of my overall general analysis of Kenneth Walker, why he's so high and why he's in that range with those other elite running backs as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and it feels like, as somebody who I own DK Metcalf in multiple leagues, and DK has been pretty good, but it feels to me every week like I'm watching Kenneth Walker take away receiving touchdowns from DK Metcalf. I mean, he's getting thrown the ball in the red zone all the time. So certainly that production's been there, and it makes sense why you believe it's going to continue to be there. Another guy that you've got just outside that first tier, who I think is going to probably end up in that first tier next week, is Nico Collins. Nico Collins, you and I talked about him early this season as a guy who you viewed at times as the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Obviously the injury is a tough situation with him. It seems like he's probably going to be out, I think, for a few more weeks, but you've got him up at number 13. That's 9 spots ahead of ECR.
Yep.
It sounds to me like this is a guy that if people in your league are panicking and maybe they don't have the best record and Nico Collins is sitting on their IR and you can go grab him below market value, seems like this is a guy we might want to target at the moment.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I'm in 2 leagues where I'm 4-3, right? So like 1 game over 500. So even though I still do need wins now, I feel confident in my team's ability to score points and at least stay competitive in terms of the playoff race. I would still go after Nico Collins as a buy low. Now, look, people know who Nico is. They know at this point he's an elite fantasy wide receiver week to week when he's healthy, but his value in the trade market still is theoretically lower now than it will be in a few weeks when he returns. There hasn't been much news on him returning, but I think that's probably more of a good thing, if anything, because we haven't heard any bad news in terms of him needing to go on IR, other things in terms of missing extended time. So I expect Nico to be back in a few weeks if we don't hear anything over these next 7 to 10 days or whatnot. And when he is fully healthy, like, he's a locked-in top 5 receiver. Right now, like, we're starting to kind of develop I would say maybe close to a top 8 or 9, maybe top 10 consensus wide receiver range. Obviously we know the guys at the top, right? Jefferson, Lamb, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill now with Tua back. And I put Nico right there with those guys. Like, he any given week, he can be the wide receiver 1 overall. I'll take him over Malik Neighbors. Now that they lost left tackle Andrew Thomas with the Giants, I'll take him over Drake London just because of the big play upside. I'll take him over DK Metcalf as well, just because DK Metcalf is week to week right now and still has other competition in terms of targets on his own team with Jackson Jigba, Tyler Lockett, etc. So that's my top 10. That's my tier 1 of wide receivers. And Nico moves up when he does get healthy, and I think he is a great buy low, even though you still got to give a decent amount. If you can afford a couple weeks to give up something for Nico, I think it's a great investment looking forward for the long term of the season. We're only halfway through the regular season right now, so we still got a full, 7-8 weeks to go, including this week. I think that's enough time to invest and get him into your starting lineup in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the other side of the coin, a wide receiver that stuck out to me that you're significantly lower on than the market is Jaden Reed in Green Bay. You've got, look, this is still a guy that you're starting, right?
Yeah.
You've got him as the wide receiver 18 overall in fantasy, but consensus on him has him right there at the edge of the top 10. What do you think is knocking him down in your rankings as opposed to the expert consensus?
Yeah, these questions are tough because it's not like I don't like Jaden Reed, right? Like, I like Jaden Reed. I think he's an excellent talent. But Okay, so like let's look at half PPR for the season, right? He was wide receiver 1 in week 1. He was wide receiver 2 in week 4, right? So 2 of the games he's played this year out of 7, he's been number 1 or number 2. Awesome ceiling, right? What about the other weeks, Dalton? Week 2, wide receiver 48. Week 3, wide receiver 41. Okay, that was with Malik Willis. I get it. But how about since Jordan Love came back still? Week 5, wide receiver 24. Week 6, wide receiver 25. Week 7 against Houston when Jordan Love threw a ton. Jaden Reed, 2 catches, 10 yards, wide receiver 83. He has not had more than 6 targets in more than 1 game this year. 1 game he's had more than 6 targets. That cannot be a top 15 wide receiver given the guys in front of him. So yes, the big playability is there. Of course, he can take any catch, turn it upfield, yards after the catch for an 80-yard touchdown. We've seen him do it, but you can't bank on those plays week to week. So guys we know when healthy, T. Higgins, Brian Thomas, Terry McLaurin now with Jaden Daniels healthy, Deebo Samuel, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, even Amari Cooper now with the Bills as he starts playing more. Those guys are going to be locked into possibly double-digit targets almost every single week, which is why I had them ranked ahead of Reed rest of the season. It's all about like gauge the market, right? Like you might have owners in your league who overvalue Reed. You might have a guy in your league who undervalues Reed, and maybe you could buy him low after a couple down weeks, right? So these certain guys, like just because my rest of season rankings say one thing, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a buy or a sell. It all depends on the price. But again, I cannot put Reed over those guys because the targets are not there. You're seeing Dobbs lead the team in targets. You're seeing Wicks lead the team in targets per route run. And Jacobs getting a decent amount of targets out of the backfield as well. So that's why I've got Reed 18. Still a huge ceiling in terms of a weekly starter. But we know now after these last 3 weeks that the floor is actually very low for Jaden Reed as well.
Yeah, the Packers receiving core for me has been something that I've struggled to figure out all year. Between Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, like I feel like week to week, any one of them could be the guy. Now, it has been Reed maybe a little bit more often than the others, but it feels like if any given week, if one of those 3 guys pops off and the other 2 don't, you're not shocked. And I think it makes them all feel really volatile, at least to me.
Yeah. And for context, like I have Reed wide receiver 18, I have Dobbs wide receiver 34. He's led the team in targets the last few weeks. I have Wicks wide receiver 41. He's splitting snaps with Christian Watson, but he's getting targeted at the highest rate when he's actually on the field. We also saw that with Wicks last year as well. If Watson gets hurt, we know the targets will rise for Wicks too because he's going to be on the field more. So Wicks and Dobbs are getting targeted at a higher rate than Reed, which is why I'm starting to slowly creep them up the board. Watson's just too inconsistent. He hasn't shown the ability to earn targets at a high level. I've got him all the way down, I believe, at wide receiver 65. So that's how I rank those 4 guys overall in terms of the Packers wideouts.
And it's crazy to think about with Watson too, because that's a guy that a year or 2 ago, like the whole fantasy world was convinced was going to be the next potential top 5 wide receiver. Yeah. Another name that I want to bring up at the tight end position. This is a guy that you've been high on since before the season started. Yep. And I think people are starting to see the light a little bit. I know even like his ESPN projection now is starting to reflect it, and that's David Njoku. You have Njoku heading into this week as your number 37 overall player. That's 35 spots ahead of his consensus at number 72. This is a guy you've been high on all year, and I have a feeling with Jameis Winston under center moving forward, his stock's only rising. You've got him all the way up at tight end number 4.
Yeah. So, okay. So like, let's put things in perspective for a second here before we move on to the week 8 rankings. I have Njoku 2 spots ahead of the tight end rest of season rankings consensus, right? Not too crazy, but I still want to show that I'm bullish. I actually have him ahead of Kelsey rest of season, ahead of Jake Ferguson, ahead of Evan Ingram, ahead of Kyle Pitts, etc. The only tight ends I have above Njoku rest of season right now, and this could change, don't get me wrong, but Bowers 1, Kittle 2, McBride 3. I think there's a clear tier 1 in terms of those 4. I still include Kelsey and Ferguson because we know the target upside is there, but you're starting to see with the Chiefs, like they're kind of like shutting down Kelsey in a way after the bye. Noah Gray was more productive, used more in week 7. They just traded for DeAndre Hopkins. Travis Kelce, week 7 off the bye, 4 catches, 5 targets, 17 yards. They don't need to overuse Kelce. They're going to save him as much as they can for the playoffs. We saw them do the same exact thing last year. So that's why I have Njoku over Kelce. The reason why I have Njoku so high in the overall rest of season rankings is because if you have one of these elite tight ends, I think it's more valuable than having that second or third receiver. So look, just because I have Njoku ranked, 37 overall in tier 4, I have him ranked right next to Jaden Reed and Chris Olave. Doesn't mean you have to trade Jaden Reed straight up for Njoku. I think you can get more if you're trading away Reed. It kind of just goes to show you the value of like, hey, that's a potential buy opportunity when I can acquire Njoku for like a maybe player 75 overall price when he potentially could be double that rest of the season in terms of what he gives you in terms of return on investment. So that's how I would like to look at the trade tiers and rest of season rankings that I put out each week. But yes, I'm going to be extremely bullish, and that's why he's only behind the Bowers, Kittle, McBride group for now. Last year, let's not forget, with Joe Flacco at quarterback and with Watson and DTR, with all 3 of those guys, second half of season, he was the tight end 1 overall during the last 10 weeks of 2023. I was bullish on him coming into the year. He dealt with some ankle injuries and stuff. He's fully healthy now, has more tight end targets than any tight end in the league over the last 2 weeks. I only see that continuing to either stay the same or rise, especially with Jameis Winston under center. Winston's going to do his best Flacco impression from 2023. This Browns team we know is going to need to throw more often than not because, frankly, their defense isn't as good as it was last year, and because they're not able to run as efficiently with so many different offensive line injuries. So even with Chubb back, I expect this Browns team to be throw heavy, and Njoku will assume Cooper's role as the number 1 overall target earner and pass catcher in this offense, even over the wide receivers.
Let's jump into week 8 a little bit as well, because I think this is where, we can start to talk about the matchups that we're going to see this weekend. As you and I record this, Rams and Vikings already in progress. I'm certainly happy to see that Puka Nacua is getting plenty of targets early. But let's take a look at some of the matchups we're going to see this weekend and some of the players that you're higher or lower on in the market going into this week. I want to do a little bit of position by position here. The first player that sticks out to me like a sore thumb, I want to go right back to the offense we were just talking about. You have Jameis Winston all the way up at quarterback 12, making him a starter for you in most leagues this week.
Let's go.
Look, if you're a Jaden Daniels fantasy owner, this is the guy that it seems like you want them to be looking at.
It is, yeah. So let's put it in context. I have right in this range, I've got Winston in terms of who's 2 up and 2 down. I've got CJ Stroud 10, Tua 11, Winston 12, Caleb Williams 13. Sorry, Bears fans. Geno Smith QB 14. Tough matchup, no Metcalf. I'm totally fine with that, Dalton. I mean, you look at the Browns overall this season, they are number 6 in pass rate over expectation on the season. They're actually number 3 in expected pass rate. So even in neutral situation, when games are close, they're still throwing a ton. And we know that they're going to have confidence in Winston to do so. And I think it's going to stick for a while. Winston, I think he's a smart, he's a goofball. Don't get me wrong, which is why I love him, by the way. He's one of my favorite players in the league for fantasy and just for real life. I think he knows he's got to play a little smarter than he has in the past in terms of limiting his turnovers. But I mean, the bar is not set very low in terms of what came before him with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was terrible in his brief appearance last week before he hurt his hand, and as well as Deshaun Watson too, right? So the Baltimore Ravens, they are just bleeding passing production and volume to their opponents this season so far. So if you look at the Ravens defense, they're in the bottom 10 in terms of wide receiver points allowed to opposing wide receivers in fantasy. Same thing with as well with quarterbacks too. And even when you look at a PFF grade, for example, the Ravens are in the bottom 10 in the NFL in coverage grade per PFF as well. I expect the Ravens to have no issue scoring on the Browns, which means that Jameis Winston's going to drop back and throw it a ton. We saw him just in about one quarter of action, or barely a half of action in week 7. I mean, he put up some decent numbers. He was 5 for 11, 67 yards and a touchdown, 6.1 yards per attempt. Tillman looked good, the second-year receiver out of Tennessee. So I just think the pass volume, the matchup, the track record we know with Winston, when he was starting for the Bucs, he was giving you like top 5, potential top 2 or 3 weeks almost every other week. So I'm going to chase the upside there. And I think it's a fantastic matchup for him. And I've been looking forward to him starting all year. So, yeah, like I've got him over Bo Nix, over Russell Wilson, over Jared Goff, over Aaron Rodgers, over Baker Mayfield, over Dak Prescott, over Mahomes, Anthony Richardson. Give me Winston over all those guys. I'm confident in the ceiling this week, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and a player you just mentioned that I think we've beaten this dead horse a couple times on this show, but it's worth mentioning again. If you are still expecting Patrick Mahomes to deliver you value as a fantasy quarterback, the only value you have any chance of getting with Patrick Mahomes is maybe finding a league mate who reads that name and wants to trade for him. Other than that, I mean, should anybody be rostering Patrick Mahomes, really?
No, they shouldn't. He's a drop. He's in one quarterback leagues. He's a drop. He hasn't finished better than QB 14, Dalton, any week this season. 14, 15, 17, 20, 19. He's pretty consistent in terms of being a QB 15 to QB 20 every week. And why did the Chiefs need to open things up in the pass game against the Raiders? I mean, I expect them. Kareem Hunt, he leads the NFL in total touches per game since he became the starter in Kansas City. I expect that to continue at least for this week. I know Pacheco is going to be coming back soon, but I mean, it's honestly, I don't even know if I'm too low on Mahomes at QB 21 this week. And I don't understand why the consensus rankers, like 200 other smart analysts, they're paying too much attention to the name on the back of the jersey. And for some reason, he's QB 11 in the expert consensus rankings. Like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but that's a huge reason to why I'm the number 1 QB accuracy ranker this year. And I think it's because I've consistently been ranking Mahomes like 5 to 10 spots lower than consensus every single week, and I do not see a reason to move him up this week. Somebody asked me earlier in the Discord AMA, they said, does DeAndre Hopkins go into KC? Does he make Mahomes viable? And I said, no, because Rashee Rice is better than DeAndre Hopkins is at this age, and Mahomes wasn't viable with Rashee Rice. Mahomes wasn't viable with Pacheco before he got hurt. So it doesn't really change much for me. In a super flex league, yeah, he's fine, whatever. In a one quarterback league outside of like 14 plus leagues with deep benches, I think he's a drop.
Moving over to the running back position, it's an interesting week at the running back position for me, especially in Tampa Bay. It looks like Bucky Irving is not going to play week 8, leaving Rachaad White and Sean Tucker in that backfield. Mm-hmm. You've got Rachaad White as your RB23 this week. You've got Sean Tucker as your RB32. We have seen upside from Tucker when he's gotten opportunity this year so far. Tucker's the one that sticks out to me because you've got him, way ahead of consensus here, 15 spots ahead of it. What do you make of that backfield this week against Atlanta? And what's your general thought on Sean Tucker, Rachaad White, Bucky Irving moving forward?
I want to get out from under it. I don't want any of them rest of the season on my team if I can help it. I'm stuck with Bucky on a few teams, and it was looking great last week when it was Rachaad White was out. Bucky had a great game. He was already starting to earn more snaps and touches than Rachaad White, and then him and Tucker split time, and then he still can't take control of the job himself, and White comes back. Now, it's just a mess, right? It's a mess. Rachaad White has value because, let's be real. Baker Mayfield just lost Chris Godwin. He just lost Mike Evans. All he's got is a rookie wide receiver and Jalen McMillan and, a mediocre at tight end and Cade Otton can rack up some catches, don't get me wrong, but he's not considered like an elite athlete or talent at the tight end position either. So Rachaad White is going to be one of their top target earners, I believe, in terms of just making things easy for Baker with checkdowns. Rachaad White's never been a great rusher. We all know that. The efficiency is always usually pretty low. I think I've won more prop bets, though, in the last 2 years betting Rachaad White unders and rushing yards than any other bet I've made. I lost that last week because he actually had 40 yards on 10 carries, but I think that was more the anomaly, to be honest. But let's look at like why Rachaad White, like last week, he didn't score. He didn't score a rushing touchdown, but he caught 2 receiving touchdowns. He was 6 targets, 6 catches for 71 yards. He was the RB2 overall in half PPR. I've got him RB23, so I feel like I'm not being necessarily too high or too low. With Tucker, I don't know if they're going to target him as much in the passing game, but I think there's reasons to be bullish, especially in the fact that like Tampa Bay has to use these running backs in creative ways. And I think there could be some potential for some back and forth with Atlanta playing Tampa Bay. We saw that just a few weeks back when it was a shootout between the two teams that went to overtime. A little concern with Tucker. The downside is that if, Tampa Bay just really struggles without Godwin and Evans, you could see them just go to White as the passing down back for majority of the game. That certainly is in the range of outcomes there, which is why I'm kind of tempering expectations for Tucker. I've got him around guys like Austin Eckler, Tank Bigsby, assuming ETN comes back and they're trailing in that game, Tracy Singletary, who are likely splitting touches for the Giants. So I think he's in that, justifiably in that range. He's a talented player. I don't know if he's worth a stash over some of the rookie guys, though, because unless you need him this week and you're desperate, Bucky should be back next week. And when Bucky's back, it turns into an ugly 3-way monster. And I just don't want a part of that if I can help it rest the season or for like week 9 and beyond after this weekend.
Yeah. So another offense that I want to touch on in the same division is one that, you've talked about at length recently, and you've warned people of what might be to come if Andy Dalton was no longer the quarterback in Carolina. Couple players, that's going to affect in a big way from a fantasy perspective. I want to talk about both Chuba Hubbard, who you have down at RB27 this week. That's 5 spots below consensus on him.
Yeah.
And I also want to talk a little bit about Deontay Johnson. You got him at wide receiver 47 spots below consensus. These are both guys that you are benching clearly and probably trying to sell on. Is there any case at all to be made for putting any Carolina Panthers in your roster, in your lineup this week?
I could see maybe Deontay, depending on who your options are, right? Because wide receiver 40 essentially means like you normally a 12-team league. Let's say every team starts 2 receivers. That's 24 receivers. Let's say you've got 12 flex spots across your league that use receivers. Let's say it's full PPR. So then you get to wide receiver 36, right? So kind of like saying it that way. Deontay could be like a desperation flex. I'm not too confident with Bryce Young. Early in the season, Bryce Young was really spreading things around. We saw, what was it, weeks 1 and 2 before Dalton came. Oh, man, Deontay Johnson had 34 combined yards, Dalton, in 2 games off 12 targets. Wide receiver in half PPR, he was wide receiver 75, wide receiver 74. Man, and to be honest with you, Dalton, the bottom had already fallen out on Andy Dalton too. And they're playing the Broncos this weekend, who arguably have the best secondary in the league with Patrick Surtain. Even when Patrick Surtain was out last week, they still played pretty well. I have an issue with even ranking like Bo Nix has been really good as a quarterback, right? But with his rushing upside, but I even have a problem ranking him too high this week, even though Carolina's offense is so bad, or their defense is so bad, because, maybe Javonte just runs for 3 touchdowns. The defense scores a touchdown, and then the Broncos don't need to throw the ball. I have a hard time seeing Carolina be competitive in this game. And even though I'm 5 spots lower, on consensus than on Chuba Hubbard than the rest of the industry, I kind of still feel like I'm still not low enough. You know what I mean? So push comes to shove for me. Like I don't have these guys in majority of my leagues, but if I had like Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, Raheem Mostert, I've got them all ranked back to back to back. Like I think when push comes to shove, like my gut would tell me, yes, these point projections are similar for these guys, but I still see better offensive environments for Dallas and Miami to play a Dowdle or Mostert versus Hubbard. So I might still move him lower. I'm telling you, I won't move him higher than RB27 where I have him now. Even Ramondre, if Ramondre is fully healthy against the Jets, I think he was banged up last week, which explains mostly a down week. Drake May makes that offense better. I still think I'm going Ramondre over Hubbard. So even talking through this now, I'm probably going to drop Hubbard a few more spots. I'll still start him over Sean Tucker, who's in a committee. I'll still probably start him over Austin Eckler, who's in a committee with a tough matchup. That's kind of where I start to draw the line for a guy like Chuba Hubbard. I think he's the only kind of like viable, like if you're desperate type of play. And like the problem is with selling, man, like what are you going to sell for right now? It's really tough because I don't expect many people are going to be buyers with those guys. And I hate selling low. I hate selling for peanuts. If you could like package Deontay with like 2 or 3 other mediocre players and do like a quality versus quantity deal where you trade 4 players away and get 3 or 2, trade 3 players away, get 2 back, free up a roster spot. Those are the type of things I like to do with trades to be able to kind of like bundle. We build those tranches like with the real estate loans and stuff like that that people do, throwing those bad mortgages and loans into a big stack and saying, hey, this pile of players isn't too bad, and hoping you kind of sneak Deontay Johnson past one of them. It's really hard to see a bright spot for these guys moving forward, man.
Yeah, the way I try to approach selling a player like that sometimes, and I have seen success at it at times, is you find like a 2 for 2. And I know you hate position for position swaps because you feel like it's a matter of opinion when it's the same position. But
Right.
The kind of trade that I'll like to make is one where you're convincing a guy that you're taking the worst half on one position, they're taking the worst half on the other position, when in reality,
Yes.
you're giving away 2 guys that you're low on, right? Like if you can get rid of a Deontay in a position swap like that, where somebody thinks Amari Cooper, for example, is a guy at a similar level to Deontay at the wide receiver position, to me, that's where you might be able to find value. Or maybe somebody's giving up on Marvin Harrison Jr., right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of guys that I'd be thinking about. But again, it requires other owners in your league to not be fully cognizant of where that offense is headed.
I agree. And I don't consider that like a position for position swap because you're basing it off a need. If you're trading like a higher level receiver and a lower level running back, and that you're getting the opposite from the owner, you're getting a high level running back and a low level receiver, I think that's fine. If you're trading Deontay just for another receiver, that's when it just becomes an opinion game, right? So it's kind of hard to give advice in those situations. It's hard to sell those guys right now, but I agree with you in that sense. And I think guys like that could be buy lows, like Devonta Smith had a negative 2-yard game in week 7. Jameson Williams, I think, had negative yards. Tank Dell had 0 catches, my guy. I'm fine selling Deontay for any of those if you can, because Deontay still had more targets at the end of the day. So I think maybe some of those guys, like you said, Marvin Harrison, maybe you can package Deontay and a second player for a Marvin Harrison. And like you said, that owner might be more frustrated in Marvin Harrison. They haven't had to deal with the Deontay Johnson's frustration yet. They might be a little more rose-colored in their glasses outlook on that. So I do think there are ways to go about it, and I think you bring up some good points there.
Yeah. And shout out to Tank Dell and Devonta Smith for both no-showing last week when I was playing against you in fantasy and you had both of them in the lineup. So
oh my gosh,
I'm sure they have better days ahead, but I was not too upset at them.
I got to get that off my, I'm in 5 leagues, 5 managed season-long leagues where I set lineups. And I had a lot of Jameson Williams. I have a lot of Deebo Samuel, Devonta Smith, Tank Dell. They combined for negative points, all 4 of them combined. Like this season is just blackout drunk, Dalton. I don't know what to do right now with all these receiver injuries. It's killing me.
Yeah, couple other receivers that I want to hit on, and then we'll move over to tight ends. But 2 receivers that I think are worth talking about based on where you have them ranked for this week, and they're playing against each other. Jakobi Meyers for Vegas, you've got him at wide receiver 28. That's 14 spots ahead of consensus. And DeAndre Hopkins, the new face for Kansas City with the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. You have him all the way up at 29. That's 26 spots ahead of consensus. I want to hear a little bit about both of them, right? I think with Myers, the obvious case to make is Devontae Adams is out of town. And with Hopkins, like, is he the guy who steps into that Rashee Rice role, and to what extent?
Yeah, so I don't think that Hopkins necessarily replaces Rashee Rice, but I think he will earn targets nonetheless. He's a veteran. He's a savvy route runner. I think he'll be motivated. I think Mahomes will try to make him happy off the bat. So I would think he should play close to a full allotment of snaps in this game, run routes, etc. Look, with Jakobi Meyers, like the last 3 games he played, he had 28 targets in 3 games. Like that's elite, right? 9 targets, 10 targets, 9 targets. Minshew boosts this offense's floor for sure versus Aiden O'Connell. We know Minshew can sling it around and make other players fantasy relevant, right? We know he's done that in the past. He did it earlier this year as well. The Raiders are 10-point dogs, man. So like the market's telling you like more often than not, the Raiders are going to need to throw a lot, right? So I think Jacoby Myers can rack up a lot of garbage time targets in that sense. I would think the Chiefs would try to somewhat focus their attention on Bowers as well, even though I still have Bowers ranked number 1 in tight ends. I mean, he's a beast, but I think that could lead to some extra targets for Jacoby Myers too. They need somebody else. Like Trey Tucker is a tiny little gadget guy. People were getting excited about him a few weeks ago. He's really not doing much on the targets he's getting. They need Jacoby as the top receiver to at least give themselves a chance to move the chains, put themselves in some scoring opportunities. Again, garbage time potential's there. So those are the reasons why I have Myers in that range. And with Hopkins, I think, Kelsey, I think they're saving. Worthy, I think it's more of like a kind of experiment week to week with him. I still like him the rest of the season, but obviously the floor is very low. I think a veteran like Hopkins can really come in and at least be like a red zone factor right off the bat for Mahomes. So, not too crazy high on these guys, but I think you can make cases to start them as opposed to like Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Terry McLaurin really scares me this week. I've got him way lower because the Bears secondary has been legit, and I don't know if Marcus Mariota will be able to throw consistently on them. So I've kind of got those guys in that range where I see a little more reason for optimism for Myers and Hopkins versus like a McLaurin or like a Calvin Ridley, for example, even though Hopkins is no longer there. They're kind of all in that same range for me for week 8.
Let's talk a little bit about the tight end position. Now, the tight end that I think is the most worthy of discussion is the guy we already talked about, and that's David Njoku. You're in pretty tight consensus with most tight ends. There is one guy who I want to hear you tell the people what you think about him, because I think some folks are maybe starting to sip the Kool-Aid a little bit again, and that's Mark Andrews, right? Okay. He's now put up touchdowns in 2 consecutive weeks. And there might be some owners out there that are like, oh, you know what? Maybe he's back. I want you to tell them why they're wrong.
Yeah, right. So I do a weekly Twitter thread. It's a usage utilization deep dive. It's my top 32 team by team takeaways from the previous week and looking ahead to schedule, to matchups, to injuries, to new opportunities and things of that nature. So you can check that out on my Twitter. I post it every week, usually around Wednesday or so. I put a lot of time into it. I use a lot of data and a lot of analysis. And I do this as a precursor to my rankings to make sure I've got everything in my head in terms of the usage numbers and everything that's important in terms of doing as best as I can on my rankings, right? So in this past week, I had Mark Andrews as a sell. And look, like almost everyone in the industry about a month ago had Mark Andrews as a drop, right? And I don't think that was wrong because he was not getting targeted at all. The Ravens were barely throwing the ball. But let's look at these last couple of weeks. The touchdowns have been there, but he has not had more than 4 targets in any game this year. I mean, that's not doing it for me. Likely still running routes, but the household name value is absolutely there for Mark Andrews. I mentioned that in my thread for the Ravens. I think you can sell him, just like if Mahomes pops off for a 4-touchdown game, I'm probably selling Mahomes because the household name value is there, and recency bias is a huge factor in fantasy football week to week, as you know. So I'm totally fine with selling Mark Andrews, trading him high off a big game because people know his name and they see the box score production. He hasn't run more than 22 routes in any game since week 2. Like, normally you're seeing players run you want to see in like the 30 route range per game in terms of the team's pass volume. He's 23rd overall in tight end target share on the season. So just the volume's not there. And if Baltimore has been in some back and forth games, that's why we've seen Lamar throw a lot more. But they're also going to be in games where they don't need to throw as much. And I don't know how much they're going to need to throw against the Browns this week. So tempering my expectations for Andrews. I would sell him if you can before another down game comes. I think he's a talented player, veteran, but he's in a low pass rate offense, and he still has to contend with targets with Zay Flowers, Isaiah Likely, Rashad Bateman's coming on lately too, and it's kind of just a hodgepodge of like 4 to 5 guys. I'd rather not. So that's why Mark Andrews is a sell for me. If you got to start him this week, okay, you can, but I've still got him outside my top 12 to 13 tight ends for week 8.
One more tight end that's worth a discussion from a buy-sell perspective. Everybody in the world seemingly expected Sam Laporta to be, I would say at the minimum, a top 4 tight end going into this year.
Right.
And he hasn't been anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And you still have him ranked as a fringe tight end 1. You've got him at the 13th ranked tight end this week. Is this a guy that we're potentially buying the dip, expecting it to improve, or is this kind of who Sam Laporta is now?
I think it's a little bit of both. My note in my usage thread this week was buy low on Laporta, but the caveat is the price must be low, right? Like it must be a low acquisition cost to make him an actual buy. Context matters so much in all these situations, from league to league, manager to manager, opinion to opinion. I will repeat that and scream that till the end, right? Jameson Williams is going to be out multiple games with his suspension. So that's a reason to boost Laporta up a little bit this week. But they're playing the Titans. And again, like I don't expect much pushback from the Titans. So if all of a sudden Jared Goff lets it rip a little bit in the first half, but the touchdowns go to Gibbs, Montgomery, St. Brown, Tim Patrick, or Khalif Raymond sneak a touchdown in, and then you're looking at halftime, Laporta's got 3 catches for 30 yards, then they just don't even throw the ball in the second half. I think that's absolutely a concern for me, which is why, yes, he's a fringe starter. We know the talent is there. We know he can have a big game, but the offensive environment this week specifically does not excite me much. I do think you could like temporarily buy him super low right now. And without Jameson Williams, there should be a slight target bump for him. So maybe you buy him for peanuts, then you trade him in 2 weeks when Jameson Williams comes back, because he's the clear third at best pass catcher in that offense in terms of target earning ability when a new and improved Jameson Williams is on the field. So that's my overall consensus in terms of week 8 or analysis in terms of week 8 rest of the season. I'm 2 spots below consensus this week. What I have him right behind, Dalton Kincaid, Cole Kmet, 1 spot ahead of Hunter Henry. I mean, Hunter Henry's been great lately, don't get me wrong, but you're talking about an old Henry versus a young Laporta on the Lions versus the Patriots. So that's why they're back to back to me in terms of, yes, Henry's been much better lately. I still kind of like lean upside in those cases, even though I'm right at consensus with Henry at tight end 14 too. So he's in that range, right? That's where I kind of put him now, where a lot of people came into the season as the number 1 tight end overall. He's obviously not going to get there at any point this season. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, an interesting thing, just kind of glancing at these tight ends as we talk through them too. Mark Andrews has 5 more targets on the season than Sam Laporta.
Oh my gosh.
Sam Laporta has 17 targets so far this year.
That's brutal, man.
I mean, both of those numbers are brutal, right? But
especially the last 2 weeks, against Dallas, like the Lions put up so many points, and he had a touchdown, right? But he had 1 catch on the touchdown. And he was the tight end. He was top 5 tight end that week, just based off. That's all you need to do as a tight end to be top 5 in the landscape we have now, is to score a touchdown. The problem is touchdowns are the hardest thing to predict for tight ends. So you kind of want to base it off the usage, which is why I said Tucker Kraft was kind of a sell high in my usage model. He hasn't had more than 3 targets in like 3 straight games. So I love Kraft. I think he'll have a big game against the Jaguars this week, but if he gets 3 targets and doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to have a bad week, right? So those are the things I'm looking at in terms of individual player usage, team environment. It's just that Amon-Ra St. Brown 1, Jameson Williams 2. Last year was the opposite. It was Laporta was the clear number 2 target. Now Laporta's the number 3 target, but he's also competing with the running backs for targets. And so you could say he's actually, maybe when J-Mo's healthy, when Gibbs is healthy, you could probably say Laporta right now is their 4th target overall on a team that wants to run the ball more often than not. So that's absolutely a problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brutal look. I mean, speaking of targets, Khalif Raymond is like right there with Laporta in targets this year. I mean, you're not going to start Khalif Raymond over Laporta in the flex or anything like that, but it just goes to show he's just not, he just hasn't been as involved as you'd like to see. Let's talk about defenses and kickers before we call it a night here. I know we don't like to spend a ton of time on these two categories because they're so week to week. Defenses this week specifically, the one that sticks out to me, I mean, waivers have been run already, but if the Houston Texans defense is still sitting on waivers, taking on the turnover machine that Anthony Richardson's become, seems like that's the one that we're kind of targeting here if we can.
Yeah, I mean, like somebody asked me earlier in the AMA, they said, why are you so high on the Texans? Well, I said, consensus has them number 9, and I've got them number 5. So, I mean, like, yes, it's 4 spots higher, but I think once you get past the first 2 or 3 options, like you're looking at some pretty strong options this week, man. Like the Chargers, I like them a lot at home versus Spencer Rattler. I just want to look at who the opposing quarterback is, really. Like you said, turnover prone, interception prone, sack prone, Anthony Richardson. If the Texans can build a lead at home here, and we're getting Richardson dropping back 30 times, and that's going to be fantasy gold for the Texans DST. Good above average pass rush, above average secondary. At home, looking for a bounce back week off the tough loss of the Packers last week when Stroud had his worst game of his career, arguably. Those are all different reasons for me why I kind of boost them a little bit here. I've got them right around the Ravens, Lions against Tennessee. That's a great matchup for them. Ravens against the Browns, obviously. Like we know Winston's going to throw a ton. As much as we love Winston for fantasy, we won't be surprised if there's a pick 6 in there, right? Like that's the fun of watching Jameis Winston play quarterback too. And then the Jets against a rookie quarterback in Drake May. I think it's a similar type of reasoning there. And I like the Texans for those reasons. I think at worst they're top 10, and I'm willing to put them up to top 5 for this week.
Get some quick chatter in on kickers here. I mean, look, there's only so much you can do when you're trying to pick out a kicker to pop any given week. The name that sticks out to me most here is Jason Sanders, the kicker for the Dolphins. With Tua coming back, we're expecting that offense to look a whole lot different, meaning better scoring environment, potentially more opportunity to kick. Jason Sanders, I'm assuming that's the handicap on why we like him. Any other kickers that we want to really touch on here?
Yeah, we'll say just real quick on the defense thing, like another one that might be on waivers is the Falcons. Their defense 16 in rankings right now. I've got them 12th, and they're playing Baker, but they're playing a Baker that has no Godwin or Evans, so that means something there. And the Falcons have been good in spots this year. And then the Eagles, like the Eagles defense hasn't been great, but the Bengals offensive line has been struggling the last few weeks. They've had a lot of injuries on the O-line the last few weeks. Even in that win against the Giants on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football a few weeks ago, the Giants pass rush got after Burrow and sacked him quite a bit. So I could see that happening here. And in a game with a high total with the Eagles and Bengals, if they throw a lot, well, more dropbacks equals more havoc potential, right? Like more possibility for sacks, for strip sack fumbles, for interceptions, tip passes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the Falcons and Eagles offer some upside against throw-heavy teams like the Bucs, like the Bengals, who have multiple injuries at different positions this week. And for kicker, look, like we're going off of mostly implied team total, right? I kind of separate them into buckets. So yeah, like you mentioned, Jason Sanders, like, I mean, I expect the Dolphins to be close to being back this week, right? Like they're top 10 in implied team total this week, 25 points right there with the San Francisco 49ers, the Buffalo Bills, the Vikings, the Chiefs, the Broncos, even the Texans, right? Like the highest implied team total of the week is the Lions at 27.5. And we've got the Dolphins right there at 25. So that's why I'm higher on him. I think more of that, what people do with these rankings, Dalton, is like kind of give you an inside look, like behind the curtain is people will start with the consensus rankings for the week. And I think most people just don't even bother giving their personal input on kickers. Like I do, like that's the OCD in me. I have to make sure the rankings are according to my process, my research, and my opinions, which is why I moved them quite a bit. Last year, I was number 1 in kicker rankings for quite a while and finished pretty well. So that's my process in terms of how I do it. I think the Dolphins are in a good offensive environment, possible back and forth offensive points between Miami and Arizona, which is why I think Sanders should be in that top 10 to 12 range. I've got him at kicker 8 right now. Tyler Bass against the Seahawks. I've got him ahead of consensus as well. And then keep your eye on Jake Moody, who was the kicker 1 overall before he got hurt. He's trending to be back this week against the Cowboys. I think the San Francisco 49ers kicker, whether it's been him or Wright, are definitely solid options. I think the 49ers should put up a decent amount of points there too. So that there's quite a few options, I think, on waivers that could be potential top 5, top 10 kicking options for week 8 as well.
All right. Well, that'll do it for the week 8 North Shore Drive fantasy favorites show here. Really
it's been a while. It's been a while, Dom.
It has been a while. It's great to be back on air. Excited to be talking about the various fantasy implications here. And I'm sure by the time we talk again next week, there will be new injuries to discuss and new breakout potential stars. So, appreciate the time as always, Chris. Any last words for the people?
No, just check out my Twitter. That's where I post my usage thread, my rankings. You can check my Sunday morning strategy column for fantasy football. It's on the Post-Gazette website, which is post-gazette.com. I go over my updated 1 injury away handcuff stash list every week. And I also go over my 30 players to know in 30 words or less, which is essentially sleepers that are ranked like outside the top 25. Guys we're not able to cover as much in detail on this show. We try to keep this under an hour, 45 minutes, etc. So make sure to check out my Sunday morning strategy column. I'll be back with that. Had to take the week off last week. I think it was the first week off in like a year and a half, but we're going to be right back and rolling here in week 8 and going forward. So make sure to check that out as well. My Twitter, which is @MaddJournalist with 2 Ds, MADD journalist.
Sounds good. We will look forward to it, and we'll be back for week 10 next week.
All right. See you later.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.